One of my daughters is a doctor, my mother said, laughing. The other, I don't know where I went wrong. She said it to my sister's boyfriend, at my own kitchen table, on Thanksgiving, with a centerpiece candle flickering between us. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. She knew I was right there. I didn't put my fork down. I didn't excuse myself. I didn't cry. I let the sentence hang in the warm air of the room I had paid the mortgage on for 2 years, at a table I had set, beside food I had mostly prepared, and I looked at the candle and I counted to 4 inside my head. My sister Diane smiled the small private smile she always smiles when something like this happens. Her boyfriend, whose name was Marcus and who had been dating Diane for 6 months, and therefore did not yet understand the weather patterns of our family, looked briefly confused and then looked at his plate. My father, who has been looking at plates and middle distances his entire adult life when my mother says things like this, reached for the breadbasket. Just reached for the breadbasket. Like the bread needed him right then. The dining room smelled like roasted turkey and candle wax and about 30 years of looking the other way. And then I set my fork down, slowly, with both hands flat on the table. And I said, in my normal conversational voice, the voice I use for grocery lists and scheduling appointments, I said, "Why don't you tell him, Mom? Tell Marcus that Diane only became a doctor because you paid for her medical school, every single cent of it, while I lost my scholarship junior year taking care of your mother in this house, the grandmother you were too busy to visit even once during those 8 months. Tell him that part of the story." My mother's face went the color of the good china we only use at holidays, the color that means the blood has pulled back somewhere internal and urgent. Marcus put his fork down. Diane stopped smiling. 2 weeks later, I transferred exactly $0 to my mother's checking account for the first time in 4 years. The month after that, the automatic mortgage assistance payment for her house, $980 a month, running quietly in the background of my life like a leak no one talked about, also stopped. Not with a speech, not with a scene. I opened the app. I tapped 3 things. I put the phone in my pocket and took my daughter, Rosie, to the park. She went down the slide 4 times and asked for hot chocolate on the way home, and I bought her the large one because I could now. Before I explain everything that led to that table, let me tell you about the place. We live in a mid-sized town in central Ohio called Harwick. There is a Walmart, 2 Mexican restaurants, a regional hospital where Diane now works as an internist, a park with a decent slide, and a neighborhood called Briar Hollow that has been slowly gentrifying for a decade. My house is in Briar Hollow, a 3-bedroom with original 1970s hardwood floors, a kitchen I had repainted twice, and a back porch where I drink my coffee before anyone else wakes up, in the particular blue quiet of 6 in the morning. The house is not large, but it is mine. My mother, Carol, lives about 14 minutes away in the house I grew up in on Crescent Drive. She is 64. She has strong opinions about casseroles and which of her daughters is a success. The answer to the second one is not me. She is not a monster. I want to be precise about this, because the story only works if I am precise. She is a woman who spent her whole life making a quiet ranking and then defending it with the comfortable certainty of someone who has never been asked to explain herself. She is warm to people she is proud of. She is not warm to me in the same way. I have known this since I was approximately 7. The difference between being 7 and knowing it and being 36 and knowing it is the difference between a bruise and scar tissue. My father, Glenn, is a retired electrician who speaks primarily about weather, college football, and the declining quality of modern tools. He has never said a critical word to my mother or a protective word to me, not because he is cruel, but because he made peace with his role very early and never renegotiated. He loves me in the way people love things they feel guilty about, quietly, from a distance, mainly by not making things worse. Diane is 3 years older than me. She is genuinely brilliant, and I do not say that to be generous. She earned her medical degree partly through talent and partly through uninterrupted access to every resource available. She is not a bad person. She is a person who benefited from a system and never asked who was funding it. My husband, Daniel, sits across the Thanksgiving table from my mother whenever he is required to, with the practiced stillness of a man who decided long ago that the most useful thing he could do was refuse to be destabilized. He is a high school chemistry teacher with steady hands and a habit of squeezing my knee under the table when he thinks I might need the reminder that someone is on my side. He does not offer grand declarations. He offers presence. In our marriage, presence is the grand declaration. And then there is Rosie. She is 8 years old. She has my eyes and Daniel's ability to fall asleep anywhere, and she loves hot chocolate and chapter books and the color yellow with the specific intensity children bring to things before they learn to hedge. She is the reason I finally counted to 4 at that Thanksgiving table, instead of counting to infinity and saying nothing, the way I always had before. Because somewhere between her turning 7 and turning 8, I noticed what she was learning to do. But I will get to that. If you have ever sat at a table where your value was decided before you walked in the room, if you have ever been the child who got less and was expected to ask for nothing, and thank God for what arrived, stay with me. I am going to tell you what I did, and I am going to tell you what happened after. Hit subscribe if you want to hear the part she did not see coming. I promise it is worth it. Our family ran on rules. Everybody's family has rules, the stated kind that everyone agrees on, and the unstated kind that everyone follows without quite knowing why. Our family had both kinds, but the unstated ones had a specific property that took me a long time to identify. They only applied to me. Let me give you the earliest example I can pinpoint with precision. I was 9 years old. Diane was 12. My mother had a rule about screen time: 1 hour per day on weekdays, period, no exceptions. This rule was stated often and applied immediately to me whenever I exceeded it. I came home from school, did my homework, ate dinner, watched exactly 1 hour of whatever I was watching that year. I think it was a cooking competition show I didn't fully understand. And then the television went off. This was the rule. Diane was 12 and was, apparently, exempt. She watched 2, sometimes 3 hours on weekdays. When I pointed this out to my mother, carefully, without accusation, the way you point out things when you are 9 and have already learned that accusation is expensive, my mother said she was studying with the television on, that it was background noise, that she was different and I would understand when I was older. I didn't understand when I was older. I understood sooner than that. I understood the night I walked past Diane's room and the television was off, and she was on the phone with a friend, laughing about something at school, and I realized that the studying explanation had never been the point. The rule wasn't a rule. It was a shape cut specifically for me. This is the sentence I eventually understood about my mother. Rules were her favorite tool. They looked fair from the outside. The problem was they were mostly for me. The birthday parties are where you can see it the most clearly. Diane's 9th birthday, 22 kids at the community center, a rented bounce house, an ice cream cake with the good frosting, a DJ, which in our town in the late 90s meant a teenager with a speaker and a playlist burned onto a CDR. My mother wore her good earrings and held a video camera through the entire event. My 9th birthday, my mother forgot until the morning of, and asked me that evening if I wanted to invite anyone over. 3 friends came. We watched a movie and ate pizza, and it was genuinely fine. I remember that it was fine, not a tragedy. But my mother had forgotten the camera at home, and no one mentioned this, and no earrings were worn. The asymmetry was not dramatic. It was consistent. Consistency is worse than drama in the end. Drama has a shape you can point to and name. Consistency just becomes the air in the room. When Diane graduated high school, there was a party at the house with catered food, actual catered food, from a place in Columbus that made little sandwiches with the crusts removed. There were balloons from the party supply store and a grocery store cake at my graduation, and a check from my parents for $250 that I used for textbooks. Diane's graduation check was $1,500. I know this because I saw the envelope on the kitchen counter before it was sealed, and the number sat in my chest like a swallowed stone for about 3 years before I let myself examine what it meant. The car is the clearest example, because cars are large and visible and very hard to explain away. When Diane turned 17, my parents bought her a used Honda Civic in a blue-gray color that she named, inexplicably, Chester. Red bow on the antenna. Filmed the whole thing. When I turned 17, there was a conversation about how the budget was different now, how I was so capable and independent and would probably prefer to save up and buy my own. I said, of course, because what else do you say when you are 17, and someone hands you a description of yourself as a substitute for what you actually needed? I worked at a coffee shop on Route 9 and a grocery store on weekends and bought a 2003 Toyota Corolla with 112,000 miles and a driver's side window that only went down halfway. I paid $800 for it. I was proud of it with the fiercer, more complicated pride of someone who earned something entirely on their own. I drove the car with the window half down and made it to my first semester of college, which my mother had told me she would help with, right up until the point she didn't. This is the financial part of the story, and I want to be specific, because specificity is what separates evidence from feeling. You can argue with feelings. You cannot argue with numbers. I received a partial academic scholarship my freshman and sophomore years of college, $2,000 per semester, renewable, contingent on maintaining a 3.5 GPA. I maintained it. Easy enough when you are motivated, and in those first 2 years, not carrying anything heavier than the ordinary weight of being the first person in your family to live alone. My mother sent $200 a month those first 2 years, toward rent and food. My father occasionally sent $50, which arrived with no note, only the check, which is how he communicates. My grandmother, my mother's mother, whose name was Ruth, Grandma Ruth, had a fall in the spring of my junior year. She broke her hip at 78 and was released from the hospital into, theoretically, the care of her children. My mother has one sibling, an uncle who lives in Phoenix and considers distance a full-time job. The practical care fell to my mother. The problem was that my mother, by the time Grandma Ruth needed her, was deep in the process of paying for Diane's first year of medical school, which costs, at the state school Diane attended, approximately $42,000 per year when you include housing and materials. My mother had organized the family budget around this. Grandma Ruth's care was not in the budget. I was 3 hours from home by highway and 4 hours by the roads Grandma Ruth's house was on, and my mother called me in March of my junior year and said, with a voice that was simultaneously guilty and efficient, that she needed help. Just for a semester, she said, just until Ruth got steadier on her feet. I could take a leave of absence, she said. My scholarship had a reinstatement provision, she said. It would be fine. I took the leave of absence. I moved into Grandma Ruth's house on Maple Street in Harwick. I cooked for her and drove her to physical therapy twice a week and helped her with the particular humiliations of recovering from a hip fracture at 78, which are not small humiliations. And I did it without complaint because Grandma Ruth had the blue eyes and the habit of watching, and because I loved her in the specific and uncomplicating way you love someone who has always been fair to you in a world where fairness is rare. My mother came to visit once during those 8 months. Once. She brought a casserole, stayed 4 hours, and drove home before dark. When I returned to school the following fall to reinstate my scholarship, I discovered that the reinstatement provision required a formal review, which required documentation I hadn't known to keep, and which my advisor had apparently sent to an address I no longer occupied, and the short version is that the scholarship was not reinstated. I paid for my remaining 3 semesters, 1.5 academic years, with loans. $31,000 in student loans that I am still paying, monthly, from a checking account I manage with considerable discipline, and the specific awareness of someone who has done her math very carefully for a very long time. Meanwhile, Diane graduated from medical school with 0 debt. My mother paid $162,000 for her education, including the apartment near the university, the study materials, and the licensing exam fees. She paid it the way people pay for things they consider necessary, without ceremony, without a recorded broadcast, without a single dinner conversation that began with, "I'm not sure the budget can handle this." My contribution began differently, and in retrospect, typically. It started with $300 wired to my mother's account the summer after I graduated, when she mentioned the furnace was making a noise. It turned into a habit. The noise became a replacement. The replacement became expected. The expected became a monthly transfer. $300 for what my father once called household support, which thereafter became the official label, as if naming something makes it a policy. Then my mother mentioned that the mortgage payment had gotten difficult since my father's retirement reduced their income, and wouldn't it be sensible to increase the amount? I increased it. Household support became $600, then $800. Then, at the precise moment I had finally stabilized my own finances enough to breathe normally, it was $980 per month, more than I was paying toward my own student loans, going from my account to hers on the 14th of every month, like a tide that only pulled in one direction. Diane did not contribute. Diane had, my mother explained, a different financial situation. The first years after residency are difficult, the lone burden of a new doctor setting up a life. My mother said these things with genuine compassion and the quiet authority of someone explaining weather. She never applied the same explanation to my situation, which involved actual student loans and an actual mortgage and an actual child. She said them about Diane, and then changed the subject, and I let her change the subject, and then I went home and opened my banking app and looked at the number going out on the 14th and closed the app and went to help Rosie with her bath. 4 years of supporting my mother's household cost me, in total transfers, $47,040. Add the scholarship I lost, representing at minimum $31,000 in loans I would not otherwise have taken, and my net contribution to the family that excluded me from its success story is somewhere around $80,000. My mother has never mentioned this figure. People who benefit from arrangements rarely do the arithmetic. I did. But I have not yet told you about Rosie, about what Rosie was learning to do. There is a specific thing that children learn when they are treated unequally. It is not rage. Rage comes later, in the teenage years, if they are lucky. What comes first is adjustment. They begin calibrating their expectations downward. They learn to want less, ask for less, expect less, so that when less arrives, the drop is smaller. It is a survival skill. It is also one of the saddest things a child can learn, because it costs them something they can never fully name. I started noticing it in Rosie the summer before second grade. My mother had taken the cousins, Diane's 2 kids, a boy of 10 named Theo, and a girl of 7 named Lily, to a water park 40 minutes outside of Harwick. A whole day trip. She'd packed lunches, bought the passes in advance, texted everyone photographs of the slides. Rosie and I heard about it through a photo my mother posted on Facebook. Rosie was sitting beside me on the couch when I saw it. She looked at the photo of Lily and Theo grinning at the top of the big yellow slide, and she didn't say anything, and then she got up and went to her room. She did not ask me why she hadn't been invited. She did not cry. She just absorbed it and went to her room, and the not asking was worse than any question she could have put into words. It was the sound of someone deciding not to bother. That fall, before the Thanksgiving that becomes the beginning of this story, there was a small incident. My mother was having a birthday party for Lily, Diane's daughter, at her house. It was a Saturday afternoon party, balloons, a cake from the Good Bakery on 5th, the usual. She called me to discuss logistics. She mentioned who was invited. She did not mention Rosie. I asked. Carefully. I said, "Is Rosie on the guest list?" My mother paused the specific pause of someone who has already made a decision and is now deciding how to present it. Then she said, "Amelia, honey, it's really just the school friends this time. It's a smaller thing. Lily's school friends, not family. Lily's class from the elementary school, none of whom were Rosie's friends. And Theo would be there, because Theo was family, but Rosie was not the same kind of family. And my mother said this with the tone she uses for things she considers self-evident. It's different, honey. You understand, right?" I said I understood. I drove to the grocery store. I bought Rosie the good brand of hot chocolate mix and a chocolate bar she had been asking about, and a library book I'd been meaning to pick up for her. We made hot chocolate and watched a movie. Rosie asked me at one point, in the way she asks things she has already been thinking about for a while, if Grandma Carol liked Lily more than her. And I looked at my daughter's face, which was doing the brave kid thing, the careful holding, the performance of not minding, the preemptive armor of a child who has already been told, without being told, that her feelings are inconvenient. And something inside me moved from patient observation to decision. I said, "Grandma Carol doesn't always make everyone feel equally loved, Rosie. And that is her mistake, not yours. You are not less. You are not a smaller kind of family. You are the whole deal, okay?" She thought about this for a moment, holding her mug. "Okay," she said. She believed me. I intended to deserve it. By the time Thanksgiving came, I was not surprised by what my mother said. I was only surprised that she said it in front of Marcus, who was new enough to still be capable of reacting visibly, and whose visible reaction was what finally made me hear the sentence the way a stranger would hear it, stripped of the familiar softness that had made it bearable for 36 years. "One of my daughters is a doctor. The other, I don't know where I went wrong," said laughing, said at my table, said in front of the breadbasket my father was already reaching for. I counted to 4. I said my one sentence. And for the first time in a very long time, the table was quiet in a way that had nothing to do with avoidance. I went to bed that night in the particular peace that comes from having finally said a true thing in a room that preferred comfortable fictions. Daniel was already in bed reading. He looked at me over his book. I climbed in and turned off the lamp on my side and stared at the ceiling. "You okay?" he said. "Better than okay," I said. "I'm done." He put his book down. "Done like how?" "Done like I'm going to stop paying for things that have a way of making me feel like I don't count," I said. "Done like that." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "All right." One word. But the weight of it was exactly right. Not approval, not endorsement, not a flag planted. Just steadiness. Just, "I hear you and I am here." I slept through the night for the first time in a while. The next morning was a Friday. The house had the particular feel of the day after a holiday, the specific quiet of a space that held too many people the day before and is now recovering. I made coffee at 5:50 and stood on the back porch in the November cold for 8 minutes, and the cold was useful in the way cold is sometimes useful. It made the thinking clean. Not reactive. Clean. Rosie came downstairs at 7:15 in her yellow socks, hair still sideways from sleep, and stood in the kitchen doorway and said, "Can I have cereal?" She was squinting slightly, that half-asleep narrowing she does until about 9 o'clock, and her shoulders, I noticed, were not braced. They were just her regular, unguarded child shoulders. She didn't know yet what I had said at the table. She didn't know what I was planning. She just wanted cereal. I realized, watching her, that this was what it should always look like. Not the careful posture of a child who is waiting for the next exclusion, but just a kid in yellow socks wanting breakfast. "Of course," I said, and I got the cereal down from the cabinet. Daniel came downstairs 20 minutes later, poured himself coffee, looked at me with both hands around his mug for a moment. "How are you feeling?" he said. "Steady," I said. "I'm going to make some changes today." "Okay," he said. He kissed my forehead. He did not ask questions I hadn't invited. It is one of his finest qualities. After Rosie was on the bus, I sat down at the kitchen table with my phone and my laptop and a notepad, where I had written, in my own handwriting, the 4 transfers that were leaving my account on the 14th of every month: household support, $980, Watson Miller joint utilities, $120. The joint account my mother and I technically still shared from a period 3 years ago, when she needed a second account holder for a utility setup, which had never been formalized and which I had quietly continued funding because nobody ever brought it up, $300, and an automatic gift card top-up for a grocery delivery service my mother used, $75. Total outgoing, $1,475 a month, $17,700 a year, for 4 years. I opened the banking app. I sat with it for about 30 seconds. Not for hesitation. I was past hesitation. It was more like the pause before you turn off a light in a room you're leaving for the last time. Not because you're sad, just because you want to be aware of the moment. I canceled the household support transfer. 4 years. $980 a month. Gone in 2 taps and a biometric confirmation. I canceled the utilities contribution. $120. I logged into the joint account and transferred the remaining balance, $243, back to my personal checking. Then I removed myself as an account holder, which required a brief hold music experience with the bank's customer service line and a representative named Joel, who was professional and fast, and wished me a nice day without particular irony. I canceled the grocery delivery top-up, $75. The whole process took 11 minutes. 11 minutes to undo $71,400 of accumulated financial obligation, if you count from the beginning. I put the phone face down on the table. I looked at the kitchen. The paint I had chosen, that warm ivory, almost white but not quite, looked exactly the same as it had 20 minutes ago. The house didn't feel different yet, but something behind my sternum had shifted, the way a door settles into a new frame after the humidity changes. I thought, this is why they liked the arrangement. It required nothing from them except my quiet compliance. I wrote a letter that evening, not the night of Thanksgiving. I wanted space between the emotion and the writing, because letters written in anger sound like anger, and I did not want this letter to sound like anger. I wanted it to sound like me. I rewrote it twice. The third version was right. I printed it on plain white paper. I folded it in thirds. I addressed the envelope to my mother's house on Crescent Drive in my normal handwriting. I sealed it with the flat of my thumb. I put a stamp on it. I left it on the kitchen counter overnight to make sure I still meant it in the morning. I did. I walked to the mailbox at the end of the driveway at 7:10 on Saturday morning, put the letter in, raised the flag, and went back inside and made more coffee. The letter said this, and I will tell you what it said, because I am not ashamed of a single word of it. Mom, I have spent a long time making sense of the difference in how you treat me and how you treat Diane. I want to stop doing that now, because it has cost me too much. I am canceling the monthly transfers effective immediately. I want to be your daughter in a way that does not require me to purchase the position. If you'd like to talk about what a different kind of relationship might look like, I am open to that conversation. But I will no longer be available for the one we have been having. Love, Amelia. 37 words of active content. No performance, no accusations dressed as questions, no exclamation points. Just the truth, stated at a normal volume, on paper. The Watson household. That's what the transfers had been labeled on the bank statement, and I had always found that label slightly ironic, as if the payments were a kind of rent on a belonging I'd been trying to buy, would have to find another arrangement. I took Rosie to the park after breakfast. She went down the slide 4 times. On the way home, she asked for hot chocolate, and I bought her the large one. And she held it with both hands and told me about a dream she'd had about a horse that could talk, but only in riddles. And I drove through the familiar streets of Harwick, thinking that this was what a regular Saturday morning felt like when you were not spending it bracing for the 14th. 4 days later, the Tuesday after the long weekend, my mother called at 11 in the morning. I was at my desk at work, where I handled data compliance for a regional insurance company, in a windowless but reasonably pleasant office with a plant I have kept alive for 3 years. I looked at the screen. I took one breath. I answered. "What did you do?" she said. Not hello, not how are you. What did you do? The voice was the voice I had been hearing my entire life when I had done something that disrupted her preferred order of things. It is a voice that has never quite decided whether to be hurt or furious, and so it is always both, braided together. "I canceled the transfers," I said. "I sent you a letter explaining why." "I got the letter," she said. "Amelia, do you understand what this does to us? To the household?" "I have a general sense, yes," I said. "Your father is retired. We are on a fixed income. You know what the cost of this house is." "I do know," I said. "I've been paying a significant portion of it for 4 years." There was a pause, not a thinking pause, a recalibrating pause, the kind that happens when someone has entered a conversation expecting a script and discovered you are no longer reading from it. "I need you to explain this to me," she said. "At Thanksgiving, you made a scene in front of Marcus." I said one sentence, I said. "You humiliated your sister." "I told the truth," I said. "I told it quietly. In a house I pay the mortgage on." "That is not," she started. "Mom," I said, "I am going to explain something, and I want you to hear it. I paid for Grandma Ruth's care for 8 months and lost my scholarship doing it. I have been sending close to $1,500 a month to your household for 4 years. I have never been asked whether Rosie felt included. What you said at Thanksgiving? About not knowing where you went wrong? I am not your failure. I am the person who has been quietly holding up the parts of your life that you preferred not to see. I love you, but I am done with this particular arrangement. If you want to talk about a different one, I'm here." She was quiet for what I counted internally as 11 seconds. "You always do this," she said finally. "You always make things about you." "I'm going to hang up now," I said. "I'll call you next week." I ended the call. I put the phone face down on my desk. The office plant was right at eye level, and I looked at it for about 10 seconds. Then I sent an email I had been drafting for a week regarding a compliance audit, which needed to be done and which I did with the pleasant specificity of a person who has just put something large and tangled down and can use their hands for ordinary things again. The silence after that call was the most complete I had felt in a very long time. Not empty. Complete. There is a difference. My phone did not rest quietly for long. By the following day, the contacts had begun arriving in the particular rhythm that belongs to family information networks, which operate faster and less accurately than any news organization. My Aunt Patricia, who is my mother's sister-in-law and has an opinion about everything, called Wednesday afternoon with the sentence that I only had one mother. I thanked her and said I was aware of this. She said she hoped I would reflect. I told her I had been reflecting for 36 years, and the reflection had led me here. She said I had always been stubborn, which is what my mother always said too, and which I received with the same inner recognition. They think this is a criticism. My cousin Jennifer, a thoughtful person who exists in the family orbit, sent a text asking if I was okay. Not, "How could you?" Not, "Your mother is devastated." Just, "Are you okay?" I told her the true and short version. There was a silence, and then she wrote, "Yeah, that wasn't right," what she said. 6 words. 6 words from someone standing inside the same family, acknowledging the same story. It should not have mattered as much as it did. It mattered enormously. Not because I needed validation to know I was right, I already knew. But there is a specific relief in not being the only one in the room who sees the thing everyone else is pretending not to see. The relief of not being crazy. My Uncle Tom called the following Thursday. He said my parents were worried, which I took to mean my mother was worried, since my father expresses worry by reaching for bread. He said he wasn't calling to take sides. I told him I didn't need him to. He said, in the way men of a certain generation say difficult things, "You know your mother has always had her ways." I said yes, I knew. "You doing okay?" he said. I told him I was doing better than okay. He said good and meant it, And we talked about his dog and about the weather, which is the native language of that side of the family. 3 weeks after the Thanksgiving dinner, right around the time my mother had received my letter, processed it, contacted everyone she could, and exhausted the community outrage available to her, a piece of mail arrived in my mailbox addressed to Amelia Watson at my home address. The return address was from a catering company called Harvest Table Events, which I had never heard of. I opened it at the kitchen counter while Rosie was finishing homework. It was an invoice. Itemized. 8 pages, including the attachments. The billing contact field read, Watson, Amelia. The total amount due, $3,400. The itemization included venue rental for a private event, catering for 40 guests, tableware and linen rental, a floral arrangement deposit, and 2 line items labeled coordination fee and extended service surcharge that together added up to $580. At the bottom, there was a handwritten note on the letterhead that said, balance due per original agreement. Deadline, 30 days. I stared at this document for what I am told, by the clock on the microwave, was approximately 3 minutes. Then I called Harvest Table Events. The person who answered was a woman named Dana, who had the voice of someone who had already been fielding unusual calls that week. I gave her the invoice number. I said I was calling regarding the billing contact error on this document. I said my name was Amelia Watson, and I had not been a party to any agreement with their company and had never authorized any event on which this invoice was based. Dana looked up the account. She was quiet for a moment. She said the account had been opened in conjunction with a different primary account holder. She mentioned my mother's name, and that I had apparently been listed as a secondary billing contact during the initial setup. I said I had not authorized this and had no knowledge of this event, and would need my name removed from the account immediately. Dana said she understood and would escalate to their billing team, and could I provide my contact information. I provided it. I asked for a confirmation email, which arrived within 40 minutes with the subject line, Billing Contact Removal Confirmation. I printed it and put it in a folder. The invoice was for the birthday party. The party for Lily, Diane's daughter, the one Rosie had not been invited to. My mother had apparently put my name down as the backup billing contact when she arranged it, probably months earlier, probably assuming that the arrangement in which I funded her household also extended to events she organized for the family that excluded my household. I did not feel rage about this. I felt a cold and specific clarity, the kind you feel when a thing you suspected turns out to be exactly as you suspected, down to the details. This is why they liked the arrangement. I carried their choices as if they were mine. Not anymore. The call I did not expect was the knock on the door. It was a Sunday, 11 days after Thanksgiving, a gray Ohio morning. Rosie was at a play date. Daniel was in the kitchen doing the crossword. I heard my mother's car in the driveway first. I have learned to register its sound the way you register a door you've been listening for your whole life. I went to the front window. Her car. Behind it, Diane's car. Behind that, Kevin's car. Diane's husband, who is in most other contexts a reasonable human being. All 3 cars. In my driveway on a Sunday morning. I told Daniel. He set down his pen. What do you want to do? I'm going to open the door, I said. I'll be right here, he said. He did not get up. He offered presents, which was exactly right. I opened the front door. My mother was on the porch in her navy coat, the one she wears when she means business. Behind her, slightly off to the side, Diane and Kevin. Diane's expression was that of someone who would rather be anywhere else but has committed. Kevin was looking at the middle distance, which I recognized, and which told me he was there under social obligation rather than conviction. We need to talk, my mother said. Come in, I said. I sat in the armchair. My mother took the couch. Diane and Kevin stood near the doorway in a loose configuration that suggested they hadn't decided how committed they were to the full visit. What you did, my mother started, is not something I expected from you. After everything. Tell me what you expected, I said. I expected you to come to me, to talk, not to cut off. I sent a letter, I said. I explained myself in full. I told you I loved you. I told you I was open to a different kind of conversation. You humiliated me, she said. At that dinner. I stated a fact, I said. Quietly, in a house I pay the mortgage on. I would like to revisit the phrase after everything. What is the everything, Mom? Because from where I'm sitting, the everything includes me taking a year off college to care for Grandma Ruth while you visited once, losing my scholarship, taking $31,000 in loans, and then spending 4 years sending close to $1,500 a month to your household while Diane contributed nothing, and Rosie was treated as a different category of grandchild. The room was quiet. Diane made a small sound. Not words, just breath, the kind that means something has landed somewhere true. Kevin looked at the floor. Diane had a harder... My mother started. Diane had medical school, I said. I had a mortgage and a child and student loans and a full-time job. Nobody asked which of us had it harder. The math just kept going one direction. Mom, I said, I want to ask you one question. Does Rosie feel like your grandchild? The same kind as Theo and Lily? My mother opened her mouth. Because she asked me once if you loved her cousins more than her, I said. She was 8. She asked it carefully, the way kids ask things they've been thinking about too long. And I could not answer, of course not, because that would have been a lie, and I don't lie to my daughter. The room held this for a long moment. Kevin looked at Diane. Diane looked at her hands. My mother's face did a thing I hadn't seen. A brief, involuntary undefending, a loosening around the eyes. 3 seconds. Then it resolved back to something more guarded. But I saw it. This family helps each other, my mother said quietly. I agree, I said. I hope we can find a way to do that where it goes more than one direction. I stood up. I'm not asking you to leave in anger. I'm done with the version of this conversation where I justify the decision. The decision is made. I walked to the door and opened it. Not with a slam, with a quiet, deliberate click. My mother looked at me for one long moment. Diane met my eyes briefly, and in her expression was something I hadn't seen before. A complicated recognition. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent. Kevin nodded, almost imperceptibly, in the way people nod when they don't want to be seen agreeing. They left. I closed the door. My hands trembled for about 10 seconds. Then they stopped. Daniel appeared in the hallway. How do you feel? He said. Like I closed a door, I said. Good door, he said. When Rosie came home from her playdate that afternoon, she dropped her coat on the bench by the door in the particular boneless way children drop things when they've been somewhere enjoyable, and she asked what we were having for dinner. She did not ask who had been at the house. She did not sense any residue of the morning's visitors, because I had made sure there was none, had reset the room and the air to ordinary, because children should not have to carry the weight of adult grief. They have their own weight to manage. But she did ask later, after dinner, while we were doing dishes together. Rosie's job being to hand me the clean dishes to dry, a practice I started when she was 5 and which she still performs with the seriousness of someone who considers it a real job, she asked in her careful way. Are we in trouble, Mom? She had heard nothing, understood nothing specific. But children are antennae, and she had felt something in the week since Thanksgiving, some new frequency in the household. I dried the glass I was holding. I crouched down, which puts me at her level. We are not in trouble, I said. Nothing that happened recently is your fault. Nothing that happened is because of you. We are fine. We are actually better than fine, because I made a decision this week that I should have made a while ago, and it means that this house is going to feel more like itself. I held her eyes. Do you believe me? She looked at me for a moment with those brown eyes that are mine but steadier. Yeah, she said. Good, I said. Now hand me the salad bowl. She handed me the salad bowl with the solemnity of a person handing over something precious, and I dried it, and the kitchen was ordinary and warm and smelled like dish soap, and Rosie went back to humming something quiet under her breath that she'd been humming all week, and I understood, standing there, that this was exactly why I had done all of it. Not for the principal, not for the money, for this, for her shoulders staying at the level they belonged at. 6 months later, the house was lighter. That is the only word that correctly describes it. Not louder, not more festive, not dramatically transformed. Lighter. The particular lightness that enters a space when a sustained low-level pressure has been removed, the way a room changes after a window is opened that hadn't been opened in years. Rosie had started humming again. She had apparently stopped humming, at some point in the preceding year, and I had noted its absence without fully identifying what I was missing until it returned. She hummed while she did homework, while she brushed her teeth, something vaguely recognizable from a cartoon in the shower every morning. Daniel and I looked at each other over the rim of our coffee mugs in the particular shared language of parents who are both seeing the same thing and do not need to name it. The money that was no longer leaving our account on the 14th of every month meant that by March we had replaced the washing machine, which had been making a noise since the previous summer that I had been ignoring because the repair cost hadn't fit into the old budget. The new machine was a front loader with a glass door, and I watched the first load run through it on a Tuesday evening with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has made a sound decision and is watching it manifest in a domestic appliance. Rosie announced that watching laundry go around was actually kind of mesmerizing, which is correct. That spring, I also started putting money aside toward a trip. A long weekend in the Smokies, a cabin with a porch and a fireplace, the uncomplicated kind of family trip that is not complicated by the obligation to include people who have made it clear you are optional. We went in April. Rosie saw a black bear from the car and talked about it for 3 weeks. Daniel made a fire every evening. I read 2 novels. I have not read 2 novels in a single week since before Rosie was born. The guilt messages continued for a while. Texts from my mother, brief and pointed, the digital equivalent of a note slid under a door. I responded to each one briefly and without drama. Thanks, I'm doing well. I hope you are too. I did not pretend we were fine. I did not pretend we were irreconcilable. A different kind of conversation was available. The old one was closed. Through Jennifer, and through the particular information ecology of a small town, I learned what had happened on Crescent Drive after the transfers stopped. My mother had adapted with more efficiency than I expected. She got a part-time bookkeeping job at a local insurance office, 20 hours a week, work she had done earlier in her life. My father started consulting on electrical work for a contractor he knew, a few jobs a month. Diane and Kevin began contributing to the household. The mortgage was covered. The utilities were covered. They managed. They always could have. This was the central fact I had spent 4 years not fully acknowledging. They had not needed me to carry them. They had needed the option to have me carry them, and I had been available, and available was close enough to necessary to make the distinction theoretical. When I stopped being available, they found other options. I did not feel triumphant about this. I felt something more like the sadness of learning that a problem you spent years trying to solve was never yours to solve. It is not a clean feeling. It feels like standing in a room after the furniture has been moved and understanding, for the first time, the actual dimensions of the space. The call I did not expect came on a Thursday afternoon in late February. Pickup line, Rosie's school, the ordinary chaos of it. My phone rang with Diane's number. Her voice was careful. Hey, just that. Hey, I said. I've been thinking about what you said, at Thanksgiving, and after. She paused. I knew things weren't equal. I think I've always known. But I told myself you were stronger, that you handled things better. I said it to myself so many times I forgot it was something I made up to feel okay about a thing I benefited from. The pickup line moved forward. I appreciate you saying that, I said. I told Mom I thought you had a point, she said. She didn't take that well. But Kevin and I are contributing now. We should have been before. I'm glad, I said. Not because they needed to struggle, just because it was never supposed to be only me. No, she said. It wasn't. When we hung up, Daniel, who'd come to pick up with me, asked how I felt. Steady, I said. The conversation that surprised me most happened in early March, on a Saturday afternoon. My mother had asked, tentatively, through a text message, whether she could come by. Not to argue, she said. Just to talk. I said yes. I told Daniel, who nodded and took Rosie to the library so that the house would be quiet, and the conversation would not be accompanied by the anxious monitoring of a child trying to read the room. She came at 2:00. She sat at the kitchen table, in the same chair she always sits in when she comes to this house. And I made tea, because making tea gives everyone something to do with their hands while they figure out how to begin. She wrapped both hands around the mug. She looked at the table. I found something, she said, when I was cleaning out the hall closet at the house. She set a photograph on the table. It was a picture of her own mother. Her mother, not my grandmother Ruth, but her other grandmother, the one who died before I was born, sitting in a kitchen that was not a kitchen I recognized. The woman in the photograph had my mother's eyes, the same jaw, an expression that was careful and slightly closed. She did this too, my mother said. She had a favorite, and it wasn't my mother. She looked at the photograph, not at me. Your great-grandmother had a sister, and that sister got everything. The attention, the money for school, the good wedding, and my mother, your grandmother, spent her entire adult life funding that sister's comfort and pretending it was normal. Because that's what you did, and because at some point pretending it was normal became the same as believing it. I looked at the photograph. I thought about the arithmetic that moved across generations, the way learned arrangements replicate themselves without anyone deciding to replicate them. I understand that, I said. I believe you. And I also believe it doesn't undo what happened. I am not my grandmother. Rosie is not me. The pattern can stop here. I looked at her. But it has to actually stop. She nodded. It was not a grand nod. It was small and effortful, the kind that comes from somewhere genuine. I'm talking to someone, she said. A therapist. Patricia recommended her. I noted the specific irony that it was Aunt Patricia, who had called me to say I only had one mother, who had suggested the therapy, but I let the irony sit without voicing it. I don't know how much it will. I don't know what changes, my mother said. But I'm going. That's good, I said. And I meant it. We sat for a while longer. She asked about Rosie, and I told her briefly and carefully about the Smokies trip, about the bear, about the 2 novels. Her face when I described Rosie talking about the bear for 3 weeks did something that looked like the grandmother she could be if she was willing to pay attention. Not the grandmother she had been, the one who tied red bows on one granddaughter's presents and forgot her camera for the others, but a different one, a possible one. The family was not fixed, but it was different. The way a bone is different after it breaks and heals, stronger at the fracture, aching when the weather changes, but genuinely different in its structure. I keep a letter in the top drawer of my desk at home, not the letter I wrote to my mother. I don't have a copy of that. I only made the one. The letter I keep is the one Grandma Ruth gave me the spring I moved into her house on Maple Street to take care of her. I was 21 years old and had just put my junior year on hold, and I had not cried about it in front of anyone, and I had told my mother I was fine, and I was mostly fine, and I was also not fully fine, and Ruth, who had the blue eyes and the habit of noticing, knew the difference. She gave me the letter on a Sunday afternoon while we were sitting on her front porch, the one that faces the street where the maple tree she'd named the house after still stands. The envelope had my name on it in her handwriting, Amelia, in the particular looping cursive of a woman who had learned to write when cursive was the only option. Inside was a note on her personal stationery, pale blue with her initials at the top. It said, "You are the most careful person I have ever watched move through a world that has not always been careful with you. Whatever they tell you about yourself, this is the truth. You have never asked for what you deserved, and that is not a virtue. It is a habit that cost you too much. Stop paying for things that don't love you back. I will be watching. Love, Grandma Ruth." She died 18 months after I moved back to finish school. I went back to Maple Street for the service and sat in the second row and did not cry until I was in the car on the highway, and then I cried for about 40 minutes and then I was done. I keep the letter because it is the receipts. Not of the injustice, of me. Evidence that someone was watching carefully enough to see the true version, and thought it was worth writing down. I have built, on the steady foundation of a job that pays decently, and a house that is mine, and a partner who is present, and a daughter who hums in the shower, a life that requires no external proof. But the letter stays in the drawer. Some mornings I open the drawer for something else, and I see the pale blue envelope and I feel the specific internal settling of someone who was told the truth at the right moment. The Watson name, my name, which is now Rosie's name too, through the choice I made when we married, the choice to take a name that was entirely mine rather than the one that came with its own complicated inheritance, appears on the mortgage documents for this house, on the title of the Subaru Outback I bought 2 years ago with my own money and which starts reliably in Ohio winters, and on the birthday invitations Rosie sends to her friends, who are all invited, every single one. What I know now that I did not know at 21 or even at 30 is this. Being easy to overlook is not the same as being easy to love. They feel similar from the inside. The quiet child, the one who manages, the one who does not cause scenes, the one who keeps things running in the background while the scene is happening somewhere else. Both produce silence, but they are not the same. Easy to overlook is a failure of attention. Easy to love is a quality of the person. You can be both, as I was, and spend years confusing the lack of attention for evidence of your own lesserness. It is very expensive, internally, that confusion. It costs you before it costs anyone else. So let me say this directly to you, because I think I know who you are. You are the child who got the smaller bedroom not because the other one was taken, but because nobody asked if you minded. You are the one who got the bus pass, while someone else got the car with the bow on the antenna. You are the one who heard the words, "You've always been so independent," and smiled and said thank you, because you had learned that what they actually meant was, "We are not going to take care of you," and we need it to sound like a compliment. You are the one who at some point started calibrating your expectations downward, so quietly and so gradually, that you stopped being able to feel the difference between what you deserved and what you had settled for. I want to tell you something that Grandma Ruth told me. None of this is evidence of your value. It is evidence of a failure that belonged to the people who were supposed to be paying attention. You were not hard to love. You were easy to overlook. And those are not the same thing. You should have been seen. You were worth seeing. The fact that someone did not look carefully enough is information about them, not about you. You also received something they couldn't give you, the knowledge of how to do things on your own. The capability they called a personality trait was a skill you developed under conditions of scarcity. It is yours, and it is real, and it has carried you farther than you know. The distance you covered on your own effort is worth counting. The car I drive now is a 4-year-old Subaru that I bought with my own money, and I am aware that this is an absurdly ordinary thing to say as the end point of a complicated story. But it is the right thing. The car is the receipt. The car is the proof that someone, me, was paying attention to my own life, investing in it, treating it as the kind of life that deserves a reliable car that starts in Ohio winters. The car is not the point. The car is the evidence that I eventually believed what Grandma Ruth wrote on the pale blue stationery. The current state of my relationship with my mother is this. We speak on the phone on Sundays, usually for about 20 minutes. She has been in therapy for 7 months. She does not say things like the Thanksgiving sentence anymore, at least not to me, and not about my daughter. When Rosie had a school performance in April, my mother came and sat in the 3rd row and clapped, and afterward she went up to Rosie and said, with genuine simplicity, "You were wonderful." Rosie looked at her with the slight wariness of a child who has learned to measure warmth before trusting it, and then she said, "Thank you, Grandma Carol." Progress is not a resolution. It is a series of specific moments in which the pattern does not repeat. I have one rule for our phone calls. If my mother begins comparing Rosie to Theo or Lily, their grades, their performances, their qualities, I say, "I'm going to stop you there. We don't do that." And I do stop, not aggressively, not with a speech. I just say the sentence and hold the pause. She tested this rule once, in January, when she began a sentence about how Lily had gotten a perfect score on something at school, clearly leading toward a comparison. I said, "I'm going to stop you there." She stopped. There were 4 seconds of silence. Then she said, "How was Rosie's week?" And I told her. And the conversation was better. Not perfect. Better. Better is the whole goal, actually. I gave up on perfect a long time ago. It's not a perfect family, it's a different one. And different is enough. 2 weeks ago, I was sitting in the parking lot of Rosie's school again, in the pickup line. The ordinary Tuesday afternoon chaos of parents and backpacks and children moving like fish released from a container into open water. I had the Subaru running for heat. On the passenger seat was a book I'd been meaning to read, and underneath the book, a copy of Rosie's current school schedule, and underneath that, loose in the pocket of my bag, the pale blue envelope. I had taken it to work to show a colleague who had been telling me about a similar situation with her own family, and I was returning it to the desk drawer where it lived. I picked it up. The envelope has softened at the edges from handling. I have opened and closed it many times over 15 years. I could see Ruth's handwriting on the front. Amelia. The specific loop of the L. The slight upward tilt at the end of her A. The school door opened, and Rosie came out in her coat with the yellow lining, backpack straps over both shoulders, already looking for my car. She spotted it and raised one hand in the half wave that is her greeting at pickup. Not enthusiastic, just, "I see you. I know where you are. I'm coming." It is possibly the best greeting I have ever received from another person, every single time. I thought about what I would say to the 21-year-old version of myself, the one packing a bag to move into her grandmother's house, the one who had told her mother she was fine and mostly meant it, the one who had not yet understood the difference between being easy to overlook and being easy to love. I would say, "You are going to do something hard, and it is going to cost you, and that cost is going to turn into something. Stay steady, pay attention. The attention will matter later." The car door opened, and Rosie got in and dropped her backpack at her feet. "How was it?" I said. "Okay," she said. There was a fire drill in math which was actually kind of perfect. "A gift," I said. "Totally a gift," she said. I put the car in gear and pulled out of the line, and the afternoon was gray and cold and completely ordinary, and I was driving home in a car with my name on the title, and my daughter was beside me, unbothered, and the envelope was in my bag, and I was, in every sense that counts, exactly where I intended to be. If you made it to the end of this, I want you to answer me something in the comments. 2 questions. First, if you were me, would you have cut contact completely or kept the door open the way I did? There is no wrong answer. I want to know yours. Second, and this one is the important one, was there ever a person in your life, one person, who saw you the way Grandma Ruth saw me? Who said the true thing at the right moment? Tell me about them. I'll read every single one. If you think what I did was right, your like is how you say it. Not for the algorithm, because it is a way of saying I see what happened here, and it was not nothing, and you were not crazy. That matters to me. And subscribe if you want to hear what happened at Christmas, because my mother brought a gift for Rosie that December that I did not expect. It was small. It was imperfect. It was in the specific language of our family and its slow, grinding effort towards something better. Exactly enough. The version of my mother who brought that gift is not the one who forgot her camera at home for my 9th birthday. She is a different person, or the same person, trying harder. I am still deciding which, but I know I want to see what comes next. Stay with me. I'll be here.